The dialogue Laches begins with a speech from Lysimachus, who is addressing two companions, Nicias and Laches. He has brought them to observe a soldier in combat, explaining that he and another friend, Laches, are seeking guidance on educating their sons in military training. Lysimachus named his own son Aristides, honoring his father, while Laches named his son Thucydides, also after his own father. Lysimachus declares that he is firmly committed to giving proper guidance to the boys, unlike many parents who allow their children to choose their own paths. He offers several justifications for asking Nicias and Laches for their input. Since both of their fathers were distinguished warriors, Lysimachus and Laches hope their sons will live up to the legacy of their names. However, both men feel inadequate in providing such a model themselves, admitting that neither has personal achievements in war to offer as inspiration. Thus, they turn to Nicias and Laches, both respected military leaders, whom they believe understand courage and honor. Additionally, since both men have already brought up children, Lysimachus assumes they have some insight into instilling virtue in the young. After this introduction, Nicias responds warmly, saying that he and Laches are willing to help guide the boys. Laches agrees with Nicias, expressing his desire to support their friends, but also proposes that Socrates be consulted as well. According to Laches, Socrates frequently spends time in the company of young people who are engaged in noble pursuits. Nicias supports this suggestion, adding that Socrates recently helped him find an excellent music teacher for his son. Lysimachus then realizes that this Socrates is none other than the son of Sophroniscus, a man he knew well, and someone his own son has often mentioned. Laches continues by praising Socrates not only as a mentor to youth, but also as a man of personal valor. He recounts Socrates' conduct at the Battle of Delium, where they fought together, and claims that if others had shown the same bravery as Socrates, Athens might have secured victory. Impressed by this, Lysimachus invites Socrates to join Nicias and Laches in guiding the two boys. He first asks whether Socrates believes it is beneficial for young men to be trained in armored combat. Socrates responds that he wishes to be of help, but humbly says that he lacks the experience to judge such matters alone, and prefers to consult the more seasoned generals for their views. After Socrates defers offering his own thoughts, and asks someone else to speak first, Nicias gives his view that learning to fight in armor is indeed beneficial for young men. He maintains that any discipline which encourages physical activity instead of inactivity is good for youth. More specifically, Nicias says that in the chaos of a broken battle line, someone trained in armored combat will have a better chance of defending himself and avoiding injury. In addition, Nicias believes that mastering one military skill will naturally lead the young to pursue others, such as understanding how to properly organize troops on the battlefield. He concludes that this kind of training will awaken a boy's ambition, making him eager to follow a path of bravery and military success. Based on this reasoning, Nicias supports the idea that youths should be instructed in fighting while wearing armor. Laches, however, responds with doubt. He starts by admitting that, in general, knowledge is a good thing and that no type of learning should be outright rejected. He agrees with Nicias that handling arms could be considered a form of knowledge and, on that basis, sees no harm in teaching it to the young. Nevertheless, Laches questions whether what is being taught is real knowledge at all. He warns that those who claim to teach armored fighting might actually be frauds. To support his skepticism, Laches points out that the Spartans, who dedicate their entire lives to military training and techniques that give them superiority in war, do not practice this method of combat. He also remarks that among all those he has known who study this art, none have ever earned true distinction in actual warfare. Laches then shares a story about a man named Stesilaus, an instructor of this technique. While Stesilaus demonstrates the movements impressively, Laches says he performs so poorly in actual fighting that his fellow soldiers mock him. From his experience, Laches has generally found that such individuals tend to be timid in real combat, and therefore, He concludes that teaching this art to young people may not be worthwhile. After Laches responds to Nicias, Lysimachus turns to Socrates and asks him to settle the disagreement between the two generals. Should their sons be trained in the use of armor or not? Rather than giving a direct answer, Socrates poses a question in return. Is Lysimachus truly ready to accept the opinion of someone who might not actually be an expert on the matter? He then puts the same question to Laches. Laches responds that he would prefer to follow the guidance of someone trained in the subject, and that such a person's judgment would outweigh the votes of all four of the others combined. Socrates affirms this reasoning, pointing out that a sound decision depends on expertise, not on the number of people giving their opinion. He then asks if anyone present can claim to be truly knowledgeable in the subject they're discussing. If so, that person should lead the decision, but if none of them are experts, then they must turn elsewhere for guidance. Socrates stresses how crucial it is to determine who, if any of them, holds actual expertise in this area, since it concerns the future of their children. To clarify his point, Socrates presents a hypothetical. Suppose they were trying to decide which of them had the best grasp of gymnastics. Naturally, he says, they would choose the one who had studied and practiced gymnastics, especially under skilled teachers. He then asks if, in such a case, there would ever be a need to consult those teachers directly. Laches seems uncertain about what Socrates is getting at. Socrates then rephrases the question, pointing out that they still haven't identified the specific kind of expertise they're discussing. What exactly is the field in which they seek an expert? Nicias answers that he assumed they were debating whether the young men should be taught how to fight in armor. But Socrates insists that there's a more fundamental question to answer first, and a deeper kind of expertise involved than just the art of armored combat. To make this clearer, Socrates uses a series of comparisons. He argues that whenever someone considers a practice for the sake of something else, they must keep their focus on the intended outcome rather than just the technique. So when seeking advice, one should look for someone who is skilled in achieving the actual goal being pursued. In this case, Socrates explains, the military training is merely a method, a tool directed toward a higher end, which he describes as shaping the soul of youth. Accordingly, Socrates concludes that what they really need to determine is who among them, if anyone, has experience and skill in nurturing the soul, and who has been educated by the best teachers in that regard. Socrates suggests that he, Nicias, and Laches each described to Lysimachus and Laches the instructors they had in learning how to care for the soul. The one who studied under the most capable mentors should be the one to advise the fathers on their sons' education. But if it turns out that none of them is truly qualified, Socrates warns, then none of them should presume to offer advice, since the proper upbringing of children is a matter of great importance. After proposing that they determine who among them is most capable in the care of the soul, Socrates continues in his usual fashion by downplaying his own understanding and experience. He admits that he never had a teacher in matters of the soul, mainly because he could never afford to pay the sophists. Perhaps, he suggests, Nicias or Laches might have had such instruction, since they possess greater wealth. He adds that they must have acquired the knowledge necessary for guiding others, since they spoke with such confidence at the start of the conversation. In contrast, Socrates says plainly that he has no expertise in this area, unlike Nicias and Laches. He then asks them to name the wise teachers who educated them in such matters. That way, if they themselves are too busy to oversee the boys' education, perhaps their own instructors can be asked to take on the task. Socrates also requests that they offer some evidence of their wisdom in shaping young minds, wisdom he believes they surely must have. Lysimachus agrees with Socrates and urges Nicias and Laches to provide a demonstration of their ability to educate the soul. However, Nicias does not give a direct answer. Instead, he seems somewhat irritated, suggesting that Lysimachus clearly doesn't know Socrates very well if he takes his questioning at face value. According to Nicias, Socrates often engages in playful argument, deliberately steering conversations away from the original topic by using subtle shifts in language and logic. He says it's no surprise that the discussion has turned away from the boys and on to the men themselves. Laches then offers his own view. He admits that he has mixed feelings about the type of dialogue Socrates uses. He says he dislikes it when someone's words don't match their actions, but when speech and behavior are in harmony, like a well-tuned instrument, he finds it enjoyable. Although he claims no familiarity with Socrates' ideas, he affirms that Socrates' bravery and integrity in action make him worthy to speak with authority on important subjects. Laches then invites Socrates to go ahead and instruct both him and Nicias in anything he may know regarding the care of the soul, despite Socrates' earlier claim of knowing nothing. After receiving Laches' encouragement, Socrates once again returns to the question of who among them has had proper instruction, or who they themselves may have taught. However, he soon decides to shift the direction of the conversation. Rather than continuing to ask about teachers or students, Socrates now turns toward a more fundamental issue, the precise nature of the quality they are trying to understand. He argues that before anyone can determine whether a person possesses expertise in something, they must first clearly define what that something is. To illustrate, Socrates explains that if we didn't know what sight actually was, we would have no way of giving proper medical advice about the condition of someone's eyes. Socrates asserts that the quality they are examining here is virtue. Therefore, in order to give sound advice, they must begin by identifying what virtue actually is, since one cannot speak usefully about what one does not understand. He then asks Laches whether the nature of virtue can be known, and if so, whether someone who understands it would be able to explain it to others. Laches responds affirmatively to both questions, which opens the door for Socrates to examine Laches' understanding of virtue. Socrates chooses to begin the inquiry by focusing on one aspect of virtue, courage, which is most directly tied to their earlier discussion on armored combat. He asks Laches for a definition of courage. In response, Laches praises Socrates as a man of courage, citing his bravery in the Battle of Delium. But Socrates points out that Laches has not actually answered his question. Rather than defining courage, he has simply named someone he considers courageous. Socrates clarifies this by asking whether someone who flees from danger, rather than standing firm, can also be considered courageous. He brings up the example of the Scythian horsemen, known for their skillful fighting while retreating, and the character of Aeneas in Homer's works, who often fought while fleeing on horseback. Since such cases clearly show bravery yet do not align with Laches' description, Socrates narrows the focus of his question. He clarifies that he is not only asking about the courage shown by foot soldiers who stand their ground, but about courage in a more general sense, courage shown in all walks of life, in politics, in hardship, in danger, and in adversity. To support this approach, Socrates draws an analogy with quickness, which might be demonstrated in different activities like running, speaking, or playing music. Even though it takes different forms, it can be defined in general as doing much in little time. Socrates urges Laches to provide a similarly broad definition of courage, one that applies to every situation in which a person could rightly be called courageous. Laches attempts to offer Socrates a full definition of courage by proposing that all forms of courage consist in a kind of endurance of the soul. Socrates challenges this by suggesting that not every kind of endurance qualifies as courage. To make his point clearer, he asks Laches whether courage is a noble quality, to which Laches agrees. Socrates then questions whether endurance guided by wisdom would be considered good and noble, and Laches confirms that it would be. Following this, Socrates asks whether endurance based on ignorance or foolishness would not instead be harmful and disgraceful. Laches concedes that such endurance would indeed be bad, and taking this into account, he refines his original definition. He now limits courage to being not just any endurance, but specifically a wise endurance of the soul. Yet Socrates isn't satisfied with this new definition either. He challenges the use of the word wise by offering examples. Suppose, he says, Someone endures hardship in spending money because he knows he'll gain more in return. Does that count as courage? Or if a soldier remains in battle only after calculating that his side greatly outnumbers the enemy and he's in little danger, is that truly courageous? Socrates then compares this soldier to another who, lacking such knowledge, remains in battle despite the risks. Which of the two seems more courageous? Laches responds that the latter, the one who fights without calculation, is the braver man. From this, Socrates draws out a contradiction. If foolish endurance in this case appears more courageous than wise endurance, then Laches's revised definition fails as well. Socrates pushes further, giving more scenarios where untrained or unknowing action seems more courageous than skillful, informed behavior. A man who fights on horseback without knowing how to ride appears more courageous than a skilled horseman. Someone who uses a sling or bow in battle without knowing how to handle it seems braver than the experienced archer. A person who dives into a well unable to swim seems more courageous than one who knows how to swim. In this way, Socrates fully dismantles the theory that courage is simply wise endurance of the soul. Yet having done so, he turns to reflect on the strange conclusion they've reached. Socrates recalls how they had initially believed that foolish endurance was a negative trait, harmful and shameful, and since courage was thought to be something admirable, it couldn't be the same as foolish endurance. But now, Socrates observes, they've ended up suggesting the opposite, that what was previously dismissed as foolish and disgraceful endurance is, in fact, courage. He admits that their ideas and reasoning now seem deeply inconsistent, just the kind of confusion Laches had warned about earlier. In order to bring focus back to their investigation, Socrates proposes that they themselves try to live by the very thing they're discussing. He suggests that both he and Laches practice courage and perseverance in their joint search for the truth of its meaning. Still, despite Socrates' continued determination, Laches expresses a sense of failure and frustration. As a seasoned warrior who has witnessed many acts of courage, he feels disheartened by his inability to explain what it truly is. After Socrates has thoroughly examined Laches's view through questioning, he turns to Nicias and invites him to contribute to the discussion. Nicias responds promptly, suggesting that Socrates has been approaching the definition of courage in the wrong manner. To begin, Nicias recalls a statement he once heard Socrates make: "A man is good in that in which he is wise, and bad in that in which he is ignorant." From this, Nicias reasons that if a courageous person is also good, then courage must involve wisdom. Thus, he concludes that all courageous individuals are wise, and that courage itself is not simply accompanied by wisdom, but is a specific form of it. Socrates then asks Nicias to clarify what sort of wisdom he believes courage to be. He wonders, for example, whether it might be the kind of wisdom involved in playing a musical instrument like the lyre. Nicias replies that it is not, but rather that courage is knowledge of what is to be feared or hoped for, whether in war or in any aspect of life. At this, Laches objects. He insists there is a clear distinction between wisdom and courage. To challenge Nicias's claim, Laches draws on comparisons. He notes that doctors understand dangers related to illness, and farmers are aware of the risks involved in their work. Yet, he argues, this doesn't mean doctors or farmers are courageous simply because they possess knowledge of what to fear or feel confident about in their respective fields. Nicias answers by arguing that Laches is misunderstanding what kind of knowledge is being discussed. It is not enough, Nicias says, to know the dangers of disease or farming. That's merely technical knowledge. What truly matters, according to Nicias, is understanding whether such things, life, death, pain, or safety, are ultimately good or bad. Only the person who understands the real basis of fear and hope, Nicias claims, can be called courageous. Laches counters by accusing Nicias of confusing courage with fortune-telling. He argues that if courage is knowing what should be feared or hoped for, then it's the soothsayer who best fits that role, since soothsayers must determine whether it's better to face death or not. But Nicias rejects this. He claims that soothsayers do not possess true courage because they only predict future outcomes. They know signs and omens, not values. Only someone who truly understands whether it is better to suffer or avoid suffering, depending on the situation, qualifies as courageous. At this point, Laches criticizes Nicias for being deliberately obscure. Socrates steps in to clarify the disagreement. He summarizes Nicias's view. If courage is knowledge of what should truly be feared or hoped for, then neither a doctor nor a soothsayer qualifies as courageous. Taking it further, Socrates suggests that no wild animal could be called courageous under Nicias's definition. If courage requires wisdom, then creatures such as lions, leopards, or boars cannot be described as courageous. On this reasoning, a lion is no more courageous than a deer or a monkey. Surprisingly, Nicias accepts this implication. He argues that he would never describe an animal as courageous in the first place. For him, there's a distinction between true courage and mere fearlessness. Animals, he explains, do not fear danger simply because they lack awareness. They are bold without sense. Nicias adds that he would no more call an unthinking animal courageous than he would call a reckless child brave for charging into danger without understanding it. For Nicias, real courage belongs only to a few wise individuals, those who truly grasp the nature of fear and hope. In response, Laches accuses Nicias of using clever language to deny the title of courage to those who are commonly celebrated for it. He claims that Nicias is dressing himself in fine words while stripping from others the honor that the world rightfully bestows on them as courageous. After the sharp exchange between Laches and Nicias, Socrates makes one final effort to steer the conversation back toward discovering the essence of courage. He recalls that at the beginning of their discussion, they had treated courage as a part of virtue. Socrates reminds them that virtue itself consists of various components, justice and temperance among them, of which courage is only one part. With this framework in mind, he returns to Nicias's claim that courage is knowledge concerning what is to be feared and what is to be hoped for. Socrates elaborates that fear and hope are not about the present or the past, but rather about future pain or anticipated benefit. Socrates then begins to dismantle Nicias's definition by showing its limitations. He points out that genuine knowledge or expertise, what he calls science, is not bound by time. Just as the art of medicine deals with health in the past, present, and future, and agriculture concerns itself with the land and its yields across all times, so too must any true form of knowledge. By defining courage solely in terms of what lies ahead, hope and fear, Nicias restricts it to a single dimension. Thus, Socrates concludes, Nicias has only captured a part of what courage might be, not the whole of it. Nicias acknowledges this critique and attempts to broaden his position. He agrees that courage should not be confined to knowledge of future events alone, but should instead include understanding of all that is good or bad, regardless of whether it belongs to the past, present, or future. But with this amendment, Socrates quickly points out a deeper problem. If someone were to possess complete knowledge of good and evil across all time, then such a person would not lack any virtue. He would embody justice, temperance, and piety, all virtues at once. This means that by Nicias's expanded definition, courage would no longer be merely one virtue among others, but the totality of virtue itself. Since they had all agreed earlier that courage is only a part of virtue, this outcome reveals a contradiction and shows that the definition cannot stand. After this final impasse, Laches and Nicias return to trading jabs and criticisms before each of them admits they do not truly know what courage is. Still, despite the lack of a firm conclusion, both men express their trust in Socrates and suggest that he be the one to guide the education of Lysimachus and Meleagus's sons. Socrates, staying true to his method and humility, denies having any superior knowledge about courage. With a touch of irony, he proposes that all three of them should join the boys in their education, so they might finally discover what courage truly means.